Uncle Ted, here we are again on a
Mhm,
doctor and a priest.
mhm.
And I am very excited to be speaking to you again because this is now a couple times in a row since I've been recovering from that surgery. And so I feel like I'm back. I feel like I'm
Oh,
back if I'm able to keep doing this and have the stamina to do so. So it's good to be
mhm,
back. And you're back with us. We're going to talk about Pope Leo. Who else would we talk about? It's all the news and not only the
mhm,
Catholic Church but across every media platform here in the United States, but in the world.
mhm.
Catholic Church is getting a lot of attention and positive attention in this news cycle. So it's really wonderful to see. So um, please, how are you? Where were you when you were giving your homily? Who did you give your homily to this weekend? And then we can get into speaking about Pope.
Okay, I'm really glad to hear you say you're back, you're coming back, you're getting your health back.
Yeah.
That's great. So, managing to help in the emergency room and still doing everything else that you're doing.
Yeah.
So, this weekend I gave a homily to one of our brothers' community here in Dayton, Ohio, a small group of brothers. And the reading is so meaningful to me because the gospel was from St. John's Gospel, and St. John's Gospel is different from the other three synoptic gospels, and he is trying to help the reader understand sort of the presence of God in life that comes to us from Jesus Christ. So it's very profound gospel. And he divides it into two parts. The first part is where Jesus is preaching and committing, performing miracles. And then the second part is what called the gospel of glory. And that begins in chapter 13. And Sunday's readings were chapter 14, right at the beginning of that second part. And it's very interesting what John does as a writer. So he is telling the events of Christ's life, like his Last Supper, his crucifixion, and his resurrection, but he's putting it in terms of living in glory. And it all begins by way John describes the Last Supper. You know, the Synoptic Gospels talk about Jesus changing the bread and wine into his body and blood, and John doesn't even do that. He talks about Jesus at the supper washing the feet of his disciples. And so that's the beginning of the book of glory. And then um, the way he describes the events of Christ is like Christ is not being controlled by these events, like being put before Pilate and being put to death on the cross, but Christ is in control of them. He's like offering them. He's doing it in a sense, it's all leading to something powerful and glorious. So I don't want to go on too long here, but it's so moving to realize that we can learn, like as people, we learn to do what's right and what's wrong, and what Jesus tried to tell us what's right or what's wrong. That's the first part. But the second part is we live in glory, in the sense we live in this gift of God's life, which is constantly bringing us to newness and adventure and health and change and um, everything human, everything healthy that's human uh,
Mhm.
is healthy and it's of God. So,
So So let me back up for a second.
Mhm.
You said that John's Gospel is different than the other three synoptic books.
Right.
Um, Another vocab word, Uncle Ted. We used the word synod. It sounds similar last time.
Mhm.
What does it mean to be a synoptic book or synoptic gospel?
You asked me a good question. I can't remember exactly what it means. I think it means it's kind of coming together. The writer brings together into a synopsis, into a conclusion, everything that Christ did.
Got it. So like a synopsis. Got it.
Yeah.
And so John's coming, and you say it's different, John's book, than the
Mhm.
other three. What's different about it to you?
Well, mainly John, he wrote somewhat distant from Jerusalem. He was part of a community that was trying to discover who Christ really was. So, and that community was somewhat distant from the hierarchical church, where the other gospels already there was bishops forming and leaders forming, and John's gospel didn't ignore that, but they wanted to have relationship, much more relationship than
Mm,
hierarchical structures. So, and the relationship was intimacy, like John at the Last Supper was sat at the put his head on the lap of Jesus. It's very intimate. So it has a
mm,
different dynamic. Uh, and then that's because we're all called in, we all have that dynamic of love with God. And
mm.
that's why it's
And so,
different.
we hear this word glory a lot, and you
Mhm,
used it a number of times. And I think it's the
mhm,
first time, actually, as I'm hearing it, that I'm kind of stepping back and saying, wow, we hear this a lot. We hear it in church. We hear it in songs. We hear it in even Christmas carols
mhm,
at times, and you don't really use that word other than maybe in war. It was another place
mm,
I could think of using the word glory. I mean,
yeah,
it's not
mhm,
a commonly used word outside of this context.
mhm, mhm.
What does it mean? Why are we using this word rather than others?
Yeah. An example I was at a breakfast last Sunday with elderly people, and they were in their 80s. And they, at this
How
breakfast,
old are you, Uncle Ted? How old are you now, Uncle
I'm
Ted?
80, I'm
Yeah,
87,
you
87.
you you are a young 87. You really are, and
Oh, I
incredible what
know.
you're able to accomplish, what you do with your time, your life, and how you've
My,
given it to other people over the last 70 years or so, but
mhm.
also just continuing to do that at such a high pace. So thank you for that.
Anyway, so anyway, this couple was the woman was very talkative, and she was just a delight to be with. And you know what they were going to do after this breakfast? They were going to go to a polka dance.
Okay.
She was actually Irish and Italian, and her husband was Czech and another Eastern European heritage. But they was so anxious to go and do the polka at a kind of a Czechoslovakian polka party of some kind. So I said to myself, this woman is just full of a sense of glory. She's found a sort of an intimacy in her life. She talked about all her children and her grandchildren, and she doesn't agree with everything they're doing in their life, but she says she has these Christmas parties with them and Thanksgiving parties with them. She loves them and they love her. So it's um, a glory is a sense of this intimacy of love you have. That's part of life. I think that's what the gospel is trying to convey. Yeah.
This intimacy, this bringing people together, this
Yeah.
When I think
Mhm.
of intimacy, I think of communication. One thing that I help with the people
Mhm.
that I built businesses with, that I lead, that I've hired, is to try to make high performing teams, people who
Mhm.
are um,
Mhm.
working well together, and you do that by breaking down barriers quickly, right?
Mhm.
And I think
Mhm.
the easiest way to break down a barrier with someone else in order to get to know them better quickly is by breaking down your own barrier, by becoming vulnerable, by
Mhm.
saying something intimate about yourself, or where you have a struggle, how
Mhm.
you communicate, and where it doesn't always land well with other people, and letting
Mhm.
them know that. And by breaking down yourself and making yourself approachable to others, it
Mhm.
encourages that other person to be approached as well, or breaking down their,
Mhm.
the barriers that they put up. And I
Mhm.
think it creates that intimacy a lot quicker. We're talking about you're talking about John's intimacy with Jesus at the Last
Mhm.
Supper. I mean, it took
Mhm.
some time for that to develop. Um,
Mhm.
Yet, this preaching, this book, this
Mhm.
gospel is asking others to be intimate too. I wonder what you think about timing in terms of dedication to
Mhm.
doing this for the long term versus
Oh.
how, with strangers and people that we meet right away, is there a different message for different
Mhm.
people, for different
I love
times?
I love I love what you're saying though, like any kind of a development of a group, of a business, it takes like keep really listen to each other. But let me tell you something else I've been thinking about a lot, and that is Thomas Merton, who comes from the monastery near you there in Kentucky. Um, he would put that into kind of a theology, what you're saying. And he wrote a very famous book called The New Seeds of Contemplation. And in that book, after studying spirituality for years, he talked about what is really intimacy with God. And the second chapter of that book talks about um, what you're saying, and it is we relate to every other person or even every other human reality. And if we relate like to other people, like the people you work with, um, and you appreciate their goodness, and you take your ego out of what you want, and then let their goodness come into you, then you have sort of a contemplative appreciation or a real appreciation of them and yourself. In other words, you get the ego out of it. And that's what I think this living in glory is. It's like you're living in another dynamic away from what I want to control. It's like instead of being in control, you're I'm being open, open.
Got it. So
So
let's
it's
transfer over
wonderful.
to let's transfer over to the Pope,
Mhm.
and it's been an eventful few
Mhm.
days, a few couple of weeks here for
Mhm.
for him, as he's stepped into leading the church. There's been a lot of kind of political figures and world leaders that he's been interacting with immediately. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know how rare that is or not for a new pope to immediately put themselves on the world stage,
Mhm.
um, versus someone who might, be a little bit more quiet, have time to prepare, get their feet wet,
Mhm.
if you will. But it's
Mhm.
it's brave. It's definitely brave to go in and express your
Mhm.
opinions, but also listen and learn from these world leaders.
Yeah. Well, Pope Leo is a very interesting person. When you read the story of his life, he's born in Chicago, born of a family, by the way, of different heritage. Like part of it is Creole or Haitian, or um, And anyway,
Well,
but he
can we
was.
stop there for a second? I didn't realize that he has Creole
I
Haitian.
think his father is from a Haitian immigrant yeah, maybe his great
Interesting.
grandfather, something like that. But so he comes from this American tradition of like so many of us are. We come from so many different backgrounds, but he was raised, and he had this gift from early age of wanting to really help people. And he was raised in a family with a number of brothers and sisters, and sort of an ordinary American life. White Sox fan, tennis player, did very well. He went to a sort of a Catholic high school and was chairman of did the yearbook in the school, worked on the debate team. Then he he went to Villanova University and studied there, and then he entered the Augustinian order. Um, but always had this, and he was very intelligent. Eventually, after he became in the seminary, he studied in Rome. He studied canon law. He got a doctor's degree in canon law, which is very important because then you sort of realize what are the rules that you have to follow. And then he volunteered to go to Peru to be a missionary. And so he really developed this, I would say, this sense of a union with God, and the ability to do it. And when you look at his face, and he seems like content. He's sort of not worried or and he's strong. When he was in Peru, he had to oppose the dictator at the time in Peru, and he even preached one time and told the soldiers and not to shoot, not to, don't obey your orders. So he had to confront reality very strongly. So he had this ability in him, I guess, to think things out and know what to say, what's right or wrong. So that's
Yeah,
kind of
this
his.
idea of
Mm.
hearing a lot of different things in there. One of which is some multiculturalism, some idea of living this really typical American life in
Mm-hmm.
Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and then somehow identifying with his Creole history. Looking at it, by the way, it looks like it was his maternal grandfather that was Haitian. That's something you can kind of put aside or forget as you grow up, kind of thing. But it seems like still identifying with that. Living in Peru, being in
Mm-hmm.
Europe, being in the Vatican, is kind of blending of all these different cultures, and
Mm-hmm.
wherever he is, also not just kind of succumbing to that culture, but being part of leading that culture in a direction toward
Mm-hmm.
goodness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he also had an ability for languages, so he speaks. It's great to have him speak English. Pope Francis spoke English, but he wasn't, really good at it. When he spoke to our Congress, he really worked on hard to make sure he did it well. But Leo is very good in Italian. He's good in Spanish. He's good in, I guess, some other languages too. So he has that ability. But
Yeah.
his
Have you seen
main.
that come out? This idea of being part of these different cultures, accepting different cultures, or
Mhm,
learning from.
mhm,
Have you seen that come out? And how he's preached in any way this first couple days?
mhm. Um, I do know that in his homily that he last Sunday he had his inauguration as the Pope, as the new Pope, and in that homily he was very concerned with being a bridge builder. You know, he, he
Mhm.
he has this task of trying to. He kept bringing up peace, the need for peace over and over again, and the call for every culture to accept other cultures. You know, um, not to be opposed, but to see the value of each culture. Um, and that's really tough to do, you know, when you're a pope and he's going to. And so his difficult task, and by the way, when he spoke to the cardinals after he became pope, he spoke to the cardinals and he said to them, um, I've got this new responsibility now, and I'm going to accept it, but I can't do it alone. So he asked the cardinals to, help him, and then he laid out the principles that he's going to work on, and one of them is this principle of constantly bringing people together in solidarity, which I think I talked to you about last time, kind of a
Mhm.
synodality, having working together. So to be a bridge builder, you have to you walk this difficult walk of trying not to make people your enemy, but you have to convince them of their own truth in them, and not make them your enemy, in order to have them realize how do you dialogue in order to create something new. And it's
Mhm.
almost like he has that sort of that gift, I hope.
So yeah, yeah, it seems like he does. And the question is, his influence is certainly large over the 1.4 billion Catholics
Mhm.
um, in the world, but he also seems to have some influence uh, well beyond that, and also some power, which is a bit different, to bring
Mhm.
people together, to say, "Hey, come to the Vatican, come to me," and bring people
Mhm.
together. And again, there's just been a lot of politicians around, and Trump identifies, I believe, as non-denominational. He grew up Presbyterian. Zelensky is Jewish, yet these people are speaking to the Pope,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It's not his power, his influence is not circumscribed to simply the Catholic Church. Where does that power come from? Where does that influence come from? Why is he even able to wield that?
This is one of the things he said on Sunday. He said, "Brothers and sisters, this is the hour of love. The heart of the gospel is the love of God that makes us brothers and sisters." He also said, "The ministry of Peter is distinguished precisely by this self sacrificing love, because the Church of Rome presides in charity, and its true authority is the charity of Christ. It is never a question of capturing others by force, by religious propaganda, or by means of power. Instead, it is always and only a question of loving as Jesus did." So, I mean, that's takes a while to really grasp what all that is, but
I mean, that's beautiful. That's a different way of wielding power or influence these days, which is
right. Hmm.
not forcing your views, but accepting and bringing people
Hmm.
to the table
Hmm.
through charity and love. I mean, I love the word love. I love the word using love in order to bring people together.
If you take any relationship in a family, be it a husband and wife, or between children, or in any business, if there is that openness to appreciate each other and listen to each other, and even the ability to change, which is very hard. We're raised
Yeah.
in things that we like and change, but to
For
have
me,
some.
it's reminding me of both kind of business building, but also leading teams in healthcare. A lot of these things don't have to be quote unquote mission based, but many of them are. So when I was at Call 9, it was do right by others and all else will fall into place. That was written on the door as you came in as an employee, right? That's what you were there for. Yes, there was money making, there was helping people in various ways, there was growth and expansion and building more accounts and all those things of business, but you can have business in such a way where it's mission based. And tell you, so Sarah, my co-founder, and I are finalizing some new documents, kind of founding documents for our company, very legal. It was 14 different documents. Some of them are 25 pages, and you're going through each one. And as
Mhm.
I was going through it this weekend for kind of final edits, at the very top, it said the purpose of this document is to support the company to be able to, the business to be able to make money, essentially, in
Mhm.
short. And I
Mhm.
redlined it and I said, yeah, the purpose of this document is not only to help this company make money so that it can grow and reach more people, but it should also say the word mission there. It should also say the purpose of this is to bring people together. Even the financial documents should be written in such a way that mission is included. Um, and I think my past experiences have allowed me to say, okay, I'm even going to put that in the financial documents so that anyone comes in this company and needs to put their hands on that realizes what we're trying to do here. Um, and so, yeah, what you're talking about just reminds me of that as
Mhm.
we build things, keeping mission first, everything else can kind of follow from there. And all of us can do that in our lives.
Mhm.
Those of us who run our families, right, and
Mhm. Mhm.
are head of households and managers of the house, and as my wife calls herself, the CEO of the Peck family. So these things you can start from mission rather than just function.
Mhm.
And I think uh, the Pope can certainly,
Mhm.
comes from a mission moment.
Yeah. Mission, I think, gets to the heart of every person. Like, every one of us have to say, what is my mission in life? What, when I join a group, what is the mission of that group? So it takes a lot of hard work to say, what am I gifted at? What is my gift? What is the gift of this
Hmm.
group? But then if you name it, then you find a purpose, what you're saying. And the purpose of Leo is he really is trying to bring the people, the whole world really, into recognizing their value. And not to, he constantly, as Pope Francis, he constantly tried to talk about peace over and over again. Leo said peace is the mission that he has. Um, so to do that, you just keep, and he's very intelligent, and he's going to be careful the way he words things. But they love Pope Francis because he talked off the cuff all the time. Well, I don't think Leo's going to be afraid to do that, but he's going to also word things very carefully so that
Hmm.
you say them truthfully
You
and
also
carefully. Yeah.
couple things
Um,
there. One, that off the cuff nature of speaking that Pope Francis had versus what seems
mhm,
to be some more prepared marks or, very carefully constructed homilies that
mhm,
we're getting from Leo, which is great because he's obviously thinking
mhm,
through these things deeply, and it's the
mhm,
beginning, right? So he needs to make sure that he gets this message correct.
mhm,
People like right now in our world, people that speak off the cuff, whether that be media or social media personalities or Donald Trump, right, who just speaks off the cuff all the time. many people like that way of presenting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, I hear you saying that you either hope or see that Leo
Mm-hmm.
might be doing some of that, or do you think he'll remain more ordered and
Mm-hmm.
structured and get away from that trend?
Well, he seems to have a sort of a balance because he met the tennis player the other day. You know, one of the world star tennis players, and the tennis player's name was Sinner, by the way. He was from northern Italy, and so Pope Leo plays tennis, and so we gave him a tennis racket. You know, and the tennis player said, "You want to play a little bit of tennis?" And the Pope said, "Oh, I can't do it right now. It will mess up the Vatican room here." So, I mean, he's not going to be afraid to be who he is, I think, um,
Uh-huh.
and that we're all called to do that. You know, to really admit our feelings and not be afraid to express them honestly. And the more we do that, the more we are appreciated by people, by our families, you know, and the more we become free of doing that, especially if it comes from virtue. Virtue is the ability to know how to speak. Virtue is the ability to be conscious of other people. And he's been trained all his life to, you know, be that kind of a person.
Yeah. And so,
So,
and you're speaking about this kind of individual one-on-one kind of ability to reach humans, as well as the one-on-many way of reaching humans. The Pope's job also is operational, right? He has to run
mhm,
the
mhm,
church, he has to run the actual
mhm,
hierarchy, the structure of it. There's a
mhm,
bunch of
mhm,
it's a business. There's a huge amount of assets that they have in terms of
mhm,
priceless works of art and right and all of that. Plus there's revenues that they need in terms of donations to run
mhm,
all of this. That's the way money is made, and there might be other ways too. um, and as I understand it, the church is underwater right now. I'm not talking about
mhm,
the American church or others. I'm talking about the actual church is in quite a lot of
mhm,
is running on a deficit, is running on
right.
quite a bit of debt.
Mhm,
um, what's your understanding of that, and what's your understanding of his way of acknowledging, is he acknowledging that to the world? It feels a little bit of a kept secret, an open
mhm,
secret, if you will. Anyone can
mhm,
find that out very quickly, but there's a
mhm,
financial kind of
mhm,
dilemma that needs to be worked on at the same time, and that can get in the way of how you decide to run your church
mhm,
in a way, right? That you have to take that into account, because then how is it
mhm,
going to be able to sustain itself? So, can you talk to
mhm. One of the
um, be a problem or be a strength?
one of the main difficulties in the Catholic Church is you have conservatives and liberals operating, and they become sort of political. Both sides become political, and the some of the people to the far right, you know, didn't like Francis because he was doing things they like, so they weren't contributing, you know, to him. So the task of Leo is to be able to work with both sides of the Catholic Church so that they come together, which is no easy task. So, um,
Mhm.
so he has to work through the different, like the conservative church wants to go back a lot to history, and some of the traditions that are very important to the church, and the more liberal church wants to move ahead and solve these new problems that are coming along, and LGBTQ questions, and sexual questions. And so his job is, how do you work with both sides in order to bring what you call dialogue and love and appreciation for each other. And the finances will come from that kind of a union. Actually, the Vatican, Francis tried very hard to bring the Vatican finances into something stable. He didn't see it altogether, but it's kind of going the right direction. There was one big case where one of the cardinals spent too much money in buying real estate in England and lost an awful lot of money, and that was a cause for a case in the Vatican courts for a long time, and this cardinal was actually guilty of something that was not kosher, correct. So that it's taking a long time to work out the Vatican finances. So he's got a job there, Leo, and bringing that about.
Yeah.
So something like the
United States. I think something like the United States, right? Yeah, working
the United States government. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and when you're kind of running an operation, there's different different financial sheets, if you will, and so their income sheet in terms of making money versus spending money is off, right? They're spending more than they're making. But there's also a balance sheet in which that includes both the assets that you have, of which the church has a lot of assets. When I believe they own the ceiling fresco of Michelangelo, right, which is worth more than all the money in the world, probably. Right? They have all these assets. They're not going to go under tomorrow, right? And they have other things, buildings, property. Things that if ever it got into a problem, these things can be either sold or borrowed off of as collateral, right? So there is that thing. So I read these articles this weekend around how the church is in financial straits in some way because their income statement is in this way. But that doesn't look at the whole of it. I think those are written by people who don't understand like the necessary how it all works to run an operation. So I think the church is in a fine place in terms of it's not going underwater tomorrow and going away. So I just want to make sure that's clear as people go and read about this issue. So, but they're getting out of debt is probably a good idea. So we're getting to the end here. What are your hopes for Pope Leo in this next phase of his time of this first year? What do you hope he gets done or doesn't get done in terms of maybe is in a listening mode? What would you like to see?
Well, I just have a great deal of hope that he does bring people together. Like as we know, Francis traveled all around the world trying to meet people. Where is Leo who is he gonna meet with? What people are going to be willing to meet with him in order to work out some of these problems? It's just like the beginning of a whole new era in history, I think, when we have such conflict in the world, and yet you have some power. Now, there were 6,000 journalists at the funeral of Francis, and there's so much attention given to this power of dialogue and love that Francis created, and now Leo's at the cusp of trying to create something new with it. We don't know, we don't know what's going to happen. It's just like you sort of live in hope. Hope is not optimism, Hope is knowing that it's possible, but you have to do the work in order to bring it about. So we live in hope. Hope is like knowing that God loves us, knowing that our life, our family life, our American life, our business life, we know we are blessed by God. We have all kinds of gifts. But hope also requires doing all the work you have to do to get there. So,
Yeah, I love that reminder. Yeah, hope is hope is simply is amazing and gets people motivated, but how do you convert that to doing the real work to make it to make
right.
reality? And again, there's this thing in business where culture eats strategy for lunch, meaning you can have a strategy of what you're going to do with your business or your operation or your not-for-profit or whatever it is all day, but if you don't build the people who all understand what the mission is, who
Mhm.
are all together on it, even if they have personality conflicts, they can then
Mhm.
resolve them
Mhm.
because they're all moving in the same direction. If you're not able to build that,
Mhm.
and by doing that through setting a vision, but also you moving it through, you know,
Mhm.
who really cares about what you said you were going to do? It's about what you have done,
Mhm.
and how to get
Mhm.
it done. And so I do see this resurgence of interest in the Catholic Church in Leo because of this moment.
Mhm.
Uh, interest, everyday Americans,
Mhm.
interest through the world, interest from political leaders and world
Mhm.
leaders who want to be kind
Mhm.
of associated with this moment. And I hope we can use that momentum and that hope to continue to make progress with the
Mhm.
church.
Oh, yes. Hey, good note to
All
end
right.
on, Timothy.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Stay
much.
healthy. So,
Absolutely. Staying healthy as well. Um, and I'll see you next week.
all right. Say hello to Missy and Cass for me. Bye bye.